Chapter 1. Abandoned on a Forgotten World. The planet, known as Visor 5, had long been ignored by the broader galaxy. Its designation, a simple string of letters and numbers, seemed to match the cold indifference with which it had been abandoned. No grand battles had taken place here. No vast civilizations had once flourished. Nothing had occurred that might have warranted even a passing glance from the galaxy's greatest minds. The atmosphere was toxic to most species, the land barren, and the sky perpetually shrouded in thick clouds, casting a gray pallor over the world. For centuries, the planet had been left to drift in the farthest reaches of space, a lonely orb suspended in a forgotten corner of the galaxy. The inhabitants of Visor 5, a species known only as the Hylian, were once part of a thriving alliance, a group of intelligent and peaceful beings who had built a great city-state nestled in the mountains of their planet. Their knowledge was vast, their cities stunning, and their technology advanced beyond the standards of many known species. Yet their prosperity was short-lived, and one fateful day, a disaster of unknown origin struck, destroying much of their civilization and leaving the survivors scattered, hiding from the devastation. Most of their kind had perished, and the few that remained had long since given up on the rest of the galaxy. They retreated into isolation, allowing their once great cities to decay and become little more than ruins. In the distant shadows of the broken cities, there existed an orphan and alien girl named Selena who had once been a child of the Hylian people. She had been a part of their last generation, born into the ruins of a world that was barely hanging on to life. She was one of the last to survive the disaster, having been too young to understand the horrors that had unfolded before her. Her memories of the past were fragmented, her earliest years shaped by the confusion of loss and the feeling of being abandoned by her kind. For most of her life, Selena had known only the desolate stretches of land around the remains of her home, the broken and decaying structures of the Hylian cities being the only backdrop she had ever known. She had wandered the barren wasteland, hoping for the return of others, for any sign that there was still someone left who cared, but each day that passed only deepened the despair in her heart. Her race had been wiped out by the disaster, and she had been left behind, left to fend for herself on a planet that no longer held any promise for her people. Selena had learned to survive in this frozen world by gathering scraps from the old buildings, seeking out whatever food or resources might be left hidden beneath the ruins. But it was a lonely existence, one marked by endless days spent searching for nothing but memories of a time that could never be recovered. There were moments, brief flashes of hope, when she believed she might find a way to escape, to find something better, but they were always fleeting. She had seen the stars in the distance, their distant lights shining down upon her like the eyes of ancient beings watching over her. Sometimes, Selena would look up at them for hours, imagining that they might hold answers, that someone, somewhere in the universe, might care. But the stars had never answered her calls. It was on one such night, a night like any other in the endless cycle of darkness and silence, that something unexpected happened. She had been wandering the outskirts of the ruins again, her bare feet numb from the cold, her ragged cloak barely protecting her from the biting winds. She had come across a small opening in the ground, a fissure that led down into a forgotten chamber buried deep beneath the surface. It was the kind of place she had learned to avoid, places that were old, abandoned, and dangerous, but something within her urged her to venture inside. Something she couldn't explain, an instinct perhaps, or maybe just the need for something to break the monotony of her existence. She had no idea what she would find there, no idea that it would change everything. Descending into the chamber, her hands trembling with both fear and anticipation, she made her way into the darkness below. The air was thick with dust, and the faint hum of ancient technology filled her ears. The chamber was vast, filled with long-forgotten machines, strange artifacts, and broken pieces of technology from her people's past. It was a world of lost memories, a place where time had come to a standstill, but still, she pressed on. She knew that if she stayed, if she allowed herself to be consumed by the endless silence of the world above, she might fade into obscurity, just another forgotten soul in the vast emptiness of the universe. As she moved deeper into the chamber, Selena's mind raced. What if she could find something useful? Something that might help her survive for just a little longer? The thought of finding a way to escape this world, to leave behind the death and the unbearable loneliness, filled her with a strange sense of urgency. The more she explored, the more she felt the weight of time pushing on her, urging her to move forward, to discover something new. Suddenly, there was a loud crack from above, followed by the groan of metal shifting. Selena's heart skipped a beat as she looked up. The entrance to the chamber was collapsing. The tunnel was closing. The last thing she remembered before the darkness consumed her was the overwhelming pressure of the collapsing walls, the sharp, painful ache in her chest as the debris rained down around her. She had tried to scramble for the exit, but it was too late. The last thing she heard before everything went black was the sound of a distant roar, something that sent a chill down her spine, a sound that was unfamiliar, almost otherworldly. When Selena awoke, her body ached from the fall. The world was still dark, but the familiar chill of the underground chamber had been replaced by an odd warmth. The air smelled different, fresher, and there was the faintest sound of movement nearby. She tried to push herself up, but her strength was still too weak, her limbs heavy and unresponsive. She groaned in frustration, the sensation of her entire body being utterly exhausted overwhelming her. And then, before her blurry eyes could focus fully, she saw him. A human. His face was unfamiliar, his skin light, his features sharp, but his eyes held something Selena had not seen in a long time. Concern. His body was muscular, and his clothes were strange to her, made of materials that seemed foreign to her species. The most noticeable thing about him was his presence, the overwhelming sensation that he was something new, something other, but yet strangely familiar. Selena's breath caught in her throat, and for the first time in years, she felt a flicker of something she had long forgotten, the sensation of being seen, of not being forgotten. The man knelt beside her, his rough hands brushing her forehead with surprising gentleness, his voice a soft murmur as he spoke words she didn't fully understand. Despite the fact that he was an unfamiliar presence, the warmth of his touch seemed to reach into the depths of her heart, stirring something deep within her that she hadn't felt since before the world had fallen apart. "You're safe now," he whispered, his voice soothing, calming. "You're not alone anymore." Selena's heart raced. She wanted to speak, to ask him who he was, why he was here, but her voice failed her. The overwhelming sensation of safety, the tenderness in his touch, left her paralyzed, unsure of what to do. After years of being abandoned, of wandering alone, it felt almost impossible to believe that someone, anyone, could care enough to help her. The human seemed to recognize her confusion, and after a moment of hesitation, he spoke again, his voice firm but kind. "My name is Gabriel. I'm here to help you. You're not alone anymore. I promise." Gabriel's hands were firm, yet gentle, as he helped Selena to sit up. The warmth from his touch sent a shiver down her spine, not from fear, but from something else, something she hadn't felt in a long time, the sensation of being cared for. The human's features were still unfamiliar, his presence an odd comfort, yet the overwhelming exhaustion from her ordeal weighed heavily on her mind. She looked at him, trying to make sense of what had happened, and yet her body was too weak to ask the questions that danced in her thoughts. Gabriel's eyes, soft but full of determination, met hers, and for a brief moment, she felt like he wasn't just another stranger. He wasn't here out of curiosity or for any selfish reason. He was here for her, and that made all the difference. "You've been unconscious for several hours. I found you under the debris." Gabriel's voice was low, steady, and warm, like the flicker of a fire that brought both comfort and life. He helped her shift her position against the cold stone wall of the underground chamber, a stark contrast to the warmth he provided. Selena nodded weakly, her mind still struggling to piece together the events that led her here. The crash, the fall, the suffocating darkness of the chamber, and the faint, distant roar that had resonated through her as the walls collapsed. It had sounded like something alive, something massive. But now, here in this chamber, she was alone with Gabriel. The question she had wanted to ask, who was he? Why had he come, lingered in the back of her mind, but it seemed like an impossible thing to voice. How could she, the last of the Hylian people, a species lost to the galaxy, begin to explain herself to a human? She had heard stories of the humans, of their rise through the stars, their battles, and their civilizations. But what could they possibly know of her kind? What could he possibly know of her pain, of her isolation. But Gabriel seemed to understand. Without words, he handed her a small container filled with warm liquid, and though she had never tasted anything like it before, it soothed her. Her throat, dry and cracked from dehydration, welcomed the warmth as she drank it slowly. The liquid was strangely nourishing, filling her body with a comfort she hadn't known in years. It wasn't just sustenance, it was care, and that alone made her hesitate before setting the container aside. "Why are you here?" Selena finally found her voice, her words fragile but clear. "Why did you come for me?" Gabriel studied her for a moment, his face serious but soft. "I was sent to find survivors of your species. The Hylian Empire has been lost for centuries, but the Resistance believes you're still out there. I came to find answers, to understand what happened here." Her heart skipped a beat at his words. The Resistance? She had never heard of them. Her people had fallen, lost to the cold silence of time. What could anyone possibly want with her? Or what was left of her people? What could she possibly offer? You came to find me?" She repeated, her voice thick with disbelief. Gabriel nodded. "You're the last of your kind, aren't you?" he said, the question hanging between them, the weight of it heavy. "I didn't expect to find anyone alive, but you're here, and that changes everything." For a long moment, the silence stretched between them. Selena's mind raced, trying to comprehend his words. Could it be possible? Had someone remembered them, remembered her people, after all this time? She had heard of many who thought her kind lost forever, wiped out in the wake of their empire's collapse. But the Resistance, a force of rebels still fighting in the shadows of the galaxy? It didn't make sense. I don't understand," Selena murmured, her voice shaky as the confusion built within her. "Why would you risk everything for me? For someone like me?" Gabriel's expression softened as he crouched down in front of her. "Because everyone deserves to be remembered. And you." He paused, his eyes meeting hers. "You deserve to be given a chance to live again." Selena's heart fluttered, a strange sensation that she couldn't quite place. He wasn't just a rescuer, a human soldier who happened upon her planet. He was someone who saw her, who believed in the possibility of something more. For a moment, she allowed herself to believe it, to hope that maybe, just maybe, there could be a future beyond the loneliness that had defined her existence for so long. Chapter 2. A Bridge Between Worlds. The days that followed were both strange and profound for Selena. She had always been alone on Visor 5, a planet that had long since lost its meaning to the rest of the galaxy. She had come to terms with that fact long ago. Survival was all that mattered, but now, with Gabriel's presence, she was confronted with a reality she had never considered. The possibility of being found, of being saved. Gabriel had made it clear that he was here for her, that his mission was to find her, to ensure her survival. But as time passed, Selena realized that it wasn't just about survival anymore. It was about rebuilding, about moving forward. Gabriel's mission, his willingness to take risks and give everything for the unknown, sparked something in her, something she had thought was lost forever: hope. In the warmth of his ship, Selena slowly adjusted to a new way of life. Gabriel had been patient, giving her the space she needed to heal physically and mentally. But they also began to talk. Gabriel spoke of his home, of the human worlds and the cities that had flourished under their people's influence. He described the stars as he had known them, the interconnectedness of the human galaxy, and the struggles they had faced together to build a better future. But more than that, he spoke of his own loneliness, of the family he had lost, of his own battles with the things he couldn't control. He, too, had known what it was like to feel like a forgotten soul. As their conversations deepened, Selena began to understand him. He wasn't just a soldier or a rescuer. He was a man shaped by loss, by the same feelings of abandonment that had kept her isolated for so long. They were different species, different worlds, but they shared a common ground: the desire to live, to be remembered. One night, as the ship sailed across the stars, Selena sat by the small window of the cockpit, her eyes fixed on the shimmering lights of distant galaxies. Her thoughts were jumbled, her emotions complex and tangled, but one thing was clear: she was no longer alone. Gabriel was with her, and in that moment, she realized that their journey wasn't just about survival. It was about healing, about finding something to build upon a future. "Gabriel," she said quietly, her voice trembling slightly as she looked at him. "Why did you really come? What's in this for you?" Gabriel didn't immediately answer, his gaze softening as he looked at her. Then, after a long moment, he spoke. I came because you matter. You're more than just the last of your species. You're someone who deserves to have a chance. Someone who can change things. I believe that. For the first time in a long time, Selena found herself smiling, a soft, genuine smile that reached her eyes. She wasn't just a relic of a past civilization. She wasn't just a reminder of something lost. She was alive, and she mattered. Thank you, Gabriel. Her voice was steady now, full of the warmth she hadn't realized she had been craving. I won't forget this. I won't forget you. Gabriel nodded, his eyes filled with quiet determination. You never have to. In that moment, the distance between them, species, history, and past pain seemed to fade. They were no longer just an alien and a human. They were two souls, bound by the shared understanding that they were not forgotten. They were alive, and together, they would face whatever the universe had in store for them. As the ship sped through the stars, with the promise of a future filled with uncertainty and hope, Selena realized that the greatest gift Gabriel had given her wasn't just survival. It was a second chance and a chance to live, to be remembered, and to belong. The days that followed Selena's awakening in Gabriel's ship became a quiet rhythm, a dance of survival and understanding. Though Visor 5 was still a distant memory in Selena's mind, the stars outside the ship's windows seemed to whisper promises of a future that wasn't tied to the cold, barren land she had once called home. They glistened like jewels, far away and indifferent, but now they felt somehow closer, more attainable. Gabriel was a quiet man, methodical in his movements, but as they shared meals, the warmth between them grew. The cold walls of solitude Selena had wrapped herself in for so many years began to crumble, piece by piece, each moment spent with Gabriel stripping away another layer of her isolation. He would speak of the worlds he had visited, the strange creatures he had encountered, the odd artifacts he had collected. Selena would listen, her curiosity piqued, asking questions here and there, slowly starting to open up. She had spent so long fighting against the idea of hope, of belonging, but Gabriel had shown her that there could still be more for her than the loneliness that had once seemed endless. One evening, as the hum of the ship's engines blended with the faint sounds of distant stars, Selena found herself sitting next to Gabriel, sharing a quiet moment in front of a flickering holographic map of the galaxy. The stars shimmered, and for the first time, she didn't feel the weight of isolation pressing on her chest. You've seen a lot of this, haven't you? Selena asked, her voice soft, hesitant, yet curious. Her eyes traced the pathways of the stars across the galaxy, each one a light, a beacon far beyond her reach. I can't even begin to imagine what it must have been like for you to travel all these places. Gabriel looked at her, his expression thoughtful. I've seen a lot, but I've learned that the more you see, the more you realize how much you don't understand. He leaned back in his seat, his eyes tracing the same star map. I've always been moving, Selena, always searching for something. But there's something about this place, something about you. It feels different. Like for once, I'm where I'm supposed to be. Selena's heart beat faster at his words, and a soft warmth spread through her chest. She hadn't realized how desperately she had been yearning for that connection until now. The desire to know she was no longer alone, to know that someone saw her as more than just a survivor of a destroyed civilization. Her voice trembled slightly, but she couldn't stop herself from asking, do you think it's too late for me? Too late for my kind? Gabriel turned his gaze to her, his eyes meeting hers with a sincerity that felt almost tangible. I don't think it's ever too late for anyone, Selena. No matter what happened in the past, you can always find a way forward. He leaned closer, a gentle touch brushing against her arm. You are more than what you think you are. And I'm not going anywhere. There was a long silence between them, but it was no longer uncomfortable. Selena felt something shift within her, a sense of peace she hadn't known in years. For the first time, the endless questions, the uncertainty, the fear, it all seemed to fade. She wasn't just a broken relic of the past anymore. She was alive, and someone cared. For once, she wasn't just waiting for something to change, she was choosing to change herself. As the days passed, Selena and Gabriel's bond grew stronger, and the more they explored the galaxy, the more Selena realized that there was so much more to life than the darkness she had known on Visor 5. Her existence, once consumed by loss, was now filled with possibility, a future she had once believed was out of reach. The stars, once cold and distant, now felt like the gateway to a world that could be hers again. Chapter 3: The Unknown Path. One morning, as the ship drifted through an uncharted region of space, Gabriel received a transmission. It was faint, breaking up intermittently, but it was there. A distress signal, an encrypted message that wasn't meant for the general public. The voice that came through was distorted, but it carried a sense of urgency. "We need help. This is the outpost on Zeros 3. We've been attacked." The Dominion dash, the signal cut off, the message nothing more than a burst of static. Selena stood behind Gabriel as he adjusted the ship's communication systems, trying to get the signal to clear up. She watched him work, his fingers moving quickly over the controls. There was something in his eyes, a flicker of recognition, as though he had been here before, caught in the midst of danger, the need to help someone else burning inside of him. The Dominion. Selena murmured under her breath, the name familiar, though she had never encountered them. The Dominion was a powerful, ruthless faction in the galaxy, one that had long sought to dominate the stars. They had conquered countless worlds, enslaving entire populations for the sake of expanding their influence. If they were on Zeros 3, something terrible had happened. Gabriel's jaw tightened as he adjusted the ship's heading, preparing to make the jump to the coordinates of the distress signal. "We're going to help them." His voice was resolute, a promise that cut through the air like a blade. "There's no time to waste." Selena's heart raced at the thought of intervening in a conflict so grand, one that involved the Dominion. She wasn't afraid, not of the Dominion, but the weight of it all pressed down on her. She had only recently begun to find her own strength again, and now, here she was, about to be caught in the middle of something much bigger than herself. Could she help? Would she be able to? Gabriel turned to her, his eyes softening. "I know you're scared, but you don't have to do this alone. I won't let anything happen to you." It was then that Selena realized what this moment was, the first real test of everything she had learned over the past few weeks. This wasn't just about survival anymore. It was about choosing to fight for something greater than herself. She had been abandoned, forgotten, and alone for so long, but now, she had a chance to be part of something, to make a difference. "I'm not scared," she said, her voice steady as she met his gaze. "I'm with you. Let's do this." The stars outside seemed to shift in response, guiding them towards Zeros 3, a planet that was about to become the battleground for something that would define their future. Together, they had found a way forward, a path that led them into the unknown, toward a fate they would forge together. There was no going back now. Whatever awaited them, they would face it together, side by side. As the ship's engines hummed with anticipation, the stars ahead blurred into streaks of light. Gabriel adjusted the controls, guiding them through the vastness of space with focused precision. His brow furrowed in concentration, but his expression remained calm. It was clear that he had encountered such situations before. For Selena, though, everything was new. The unknown galaxy she had once feared was now opening up before her. The rush of adrenaline coursed through her veins, drowning out the doubt that had once clouded her mind. This was a moment of action, and with Gabriel by her side, it was a moment she wasn't going to face alone. The distress signal from Zeros 3 had been fragmented, but it was enough to confirm that the Dominion had launched an attack on the planet's surface. The Zeros 3 outpost was a research facility, and the scientists there had likely been caught unprepared by the overwhelming force of the Dominion. That much was obvious. The ship's systems picked up additional transmissions, chaotic bursts of communication filled with fear and urgency. It was a race against time. "We're close, Selena," Gabriel said, his voice low but firm. "Prepare yourself. We don't know what we're walking into, but we'll do whatever we can to help." Selena nodded, the weight of his words sinking deep into her. They were about to face something bigger than themselves. She wasn't sure what she expected to find on the surface of Zeros 3, but one thing was certain: it wouldn't be easy. The Dominion, with their vast resources and insatiable thirst for conquest, were not the kind of force you could simply negotiate with. They were relentless, their presence a cold reminder of the galaxy's harshest truths. As the ship descended through the atmosphere of Zeros 3, Selena felt a sudden shift in the air. The planet below was far from peaceful. The atmosphere was thick with smoke and dust, and the distant echoes of explosions rumbled through the ship's hull. She could feel the tension in the air, and despite the ship's impressive speed, the growing sense of unease tightened around her chest. The ship finally broke through the clouds, and before them, the surface of Zeros, 3 unfolded like a battlefield. Scorched earth stretched for miles, and what had once been a thriving outpost was now a shadow of itself. The buildings were in ruins, fires raged in several areas, and the distant sounds of gunfire and screams filled the air. The Dominion's forces were everywhere. Their sleek, imposing ships hovered in the skies, casting long shadows over the ground. Gabriel's hands flew over the controls, guiding the ship to a safe landing zone just beyond the wreckage. The landing gear thudded against the cracked ground, and the ship's engines whined to a halt. They were here in the middle of a war zone. Stay close, Selena. Gabriel's voice was steady but urgent. He checked the weapons locker, pulling out a compact blaster and handing it to her. We don't know what we'll face, but we need to be ready. Selena took the weapon, her fingers trembling slightly as she gripped it. She had never held a weapon before, but the gravity of the situation made her realize that there was no choice. She had to fight. They both did. The hatch of the ship opened with a hiss, and the moment the door swung wide, the harsh wind outside carried with it the sounds of war explosions, shouting, the desperate cries of people struggling to survive. The cold steel of the Dominion soldiers stood in sharp contrast to the chaos around them. They were well trained, their faces hidden behind dark, reflective visors, their movements calculated and precise. Gabriel stepped out first, motioning for Selena to follow. She hesitated, her heart racing, but the sight of him calm, unwavering gave her the strength to step forward into the unknown. Together, they moved cautiously through the wreckage, staying low, using the ruins for cover. Selena's heart pounded in her chest, but she forced herself to stay focused. Every sound, every movement seemed amplified in the chaos, but Gabriel remained ahead of her, his eyes scanning the area, a steady presence in the storm of fear. After what felt like an eternity of moving through the broken streets, they found what they were looking for: the last survivors of the research outpost, huddled in a small bunker. A few scientists, some soldiers, and civilians who had taken shelter from the Dominion's assault. Their faces were filled with relief when they saw Gabriel and Selena, but the danger was far from over. We need to get out of here. The voice of the leader of the survivors, a tall woman with graying hair, rang out as she approached them. She was breathing heavily, her face smeared with dirt. They've already taken most of the compound. We don't have much time. Gabriel nodded, his eyes scanning the group before he turned to Selena. We'll help you, but we need a plan. We can't just leave anyone behind. The woman, whose name was Dr. Lena, led them to a communications console in the corner of the bunker. The transmission screens were flickering, but they were functional. Dr. Lena began to work quickly, trying to send out a distress signal to any nearby forces that could assist them. Meanwhile, Selena stood by, her hands gripping the blaster, her eyes darting nervously to the entrance of the bunker. It wasn't long before the Dominion soldiers made their move. The sound of boots on the broken concrete echoed, growing louder. Selena's pulse quickened. They were coming. Ready yourself, Selena, Gabriel said quietly. He moved toward the door, positioning himself at the far side with his blaster raised. The first soldier burst through the door, a hulking figure clad in dark armor. The moment he crossed the threshold, Gabriel fired, striking him squarely in the chest. He fell to the ground with a heavy thud, but more soldiers followed, stepping over the fallen body with ruthless efficiency. Selena could hear their voices, the cold commands given by their leader, but she didn't hesitate. She had come this far. She was fighting. She raised the blaster, her hands steady despite the chaos, and fired. The first soldier she hit went down in a heap. A second soldier lunged at her, but she dodged, her heart pounding, her instincts pushing her to act. She shot again, taking him down before he could reach her. Gabriel was beside her now, his movements swift and purposeful. He guided her with his presence, pushing her forward into the fray as they fought side by side. Selena realized, with a surprising clarity, that she was no longer just surviving. She was fighting for something, for these people, for the galaxy, for herself. The battle raged for what felt like hours, but slowly, the tide turned. The Dominion soldiers, realizing they were facing more resistance than they had anticipated, began to fall back. But it wasn't just their firepower that had broken their resolve, it was the fierce determination of two beings from completely different worlds, standing united. Finally, the last of the enemy's soldiers retreated, leaving the survivors in the shattered remains of the bunker. The silence that followed was profound, the weight of what had just happened settling over them. Gabriel's eyes met Selena's, and for the first time, she felt the full impact of what they had accomplished together. "You did it, Selena. We did it," he said, his voice quiet but filled with pride. Selena nodded, her heart still racing from the battle. They had won, but more importantly, they had proven something to themselves. They had fought together, and they had made a difference. As the survivors regrouped and began tending to the wounded, Gabriel and Selena stood side by side, looking out at the stars beyond the ruins. "We've only just begun," Selena said softly, her voice steady with newfound strength. Gabriel looked at her, his gaze filled with quiet admiration. "Yes, we have." And as the last remnants of the Dominion forces retreated into the distance, Selena knew that she had found not just a purpose, but a partner in the human who had reached out to her when she had been forgotten. Together, they would face whatever the galaxy had in store for them, and together, they would write a new chapter in the story of survival.